So, as Sagan said, I'm an architect. Just ran a year ago. I've always been interested in design to kind of engage groups of people or communities, and so video games really interested me because I think it's like a really awesome opportunity to explore that engagement aspect of design. And I think there's a lot of overlap between architecture and video games, and obviously any design medium has a lot I can learn from another, but being an architect, I see it all the time when I play games, so just always been interested in the topic, and excited to share that with you guys.
To talk about story, but I thought Gone Home was actually kind of interesting because it pushed you along. Like, there's no antagonist or anything, but they actually used these little horror elements and played with these spaces to kind of push you forward. And there'd be times when you were in a dark, narrow corridor, and and then you were in a nice big room, and they would use these sort of dynamic qualities to almost get you a little bit scared, get you feeling like you have to push forward. And I think it was kind of an interesting, I don't know, a bit of a twist on the way of just doing a story-driven game. And in terms of the navigation, one thing that used to kind of frustrate me, there were certain games I loved, like Metroid Prime and Super Metroid and Resident Evil 4. Their maps made no goddamn sense. Like, if you look at the one on the right, that is supposed to be a castle. Like, how in God's name is that a castle? And how are you ever supposed to find your way through Metroid? Like, I got lost so many times. And I think having this like sort of a linear progression through a very like complex map, you end up having to bar off doors and whatnot to stop people from making their way, but it can be a bit jarring, I think, for people, and just kind of considering how do you approach this in a different way to make people able to navigate these spaces and still kind of helping them on their way in the right direction. I think Valve actually did this really well, like Half-Life and Portal. They give a lot of opportunities to see the map before you go down into it. Like, you would come up from above, they'd have a little screen where you could actually see the level you're about to walk into, and then you'd step down into it. A lot of these little kind of design choices they made just to make you understand the space before you went there. And an example, there's a Halifax Central Library. Here's a way of trying to get a sense of the entire space at once while making movement flowing easily. So here they have a very central movement space, and everything's open to each other in this big atrium, so you can see everything at once, you know where you're going, and it creates a very dynamic kind of quality because everyone's moving through it. And obviously you can do kind of simple gestures but be very effective, like having a landmark off in the distance that people can always see and always be relating to. And Dark Souls, I thought, was really great at connecting everything on the map, and like how much effort that would have been, it's kind of boggling my mind, but you really started to get a sense of where you were because, I just came back around to the main Firelink Shrine, and I was off in the middle of nowhere, I felt like. So I think it was done really, really well to start to connect everything together and make you start to understand where everything was. And kind of an interesting example of a more kind of unique way of navigating and connecting spaces. Alhambra in Spain, it's a beautiful palace basically. They used water to start connecting spaces together. So they have these little channels in the ground, and water basically is flowing from each space to the next, and then you can, when it's running, you can hear that water and you can see it and you can smell all the lush greenery, and that's almost guiding you and just giving that sense of connection. And how could I not mention the water temple? This is, I think, in terms of navigation, has some issues, but I think it's a really interesting idea, actually, and that the partie of this temple was very pure and very simple and effective. So you have a central temple, you flood it, and you can access different levels. And that, I think, was a great idea. And then you start spiraling off into these different corridors, you start getting a little bit lost and losing that sense of the space, but I think the idea of connecting everything with the water like that, I think, was really cool design. And sometimes you can create an experience just through form itself, or create an impact simply through the form. So Louie Khan was really famous for having very geometric, very monolithic, structures, and you can see this just looks almost like it's from a video game. It's crazy, monolithic building, and very geometric, these huge voids cutting out of it. And so it obviously has a presence in the landscape, but when you actually look at it closer up, it's creating this interesting form, but then inside, the quality of light and the sense of space creates a really interesting experience in this amazing space that you can experience. And actually the game, I thought, did this the most sort of, really pushed this idea the most from what I could see, was a Land's End by Us Two. It's a VR game by the people who made Monument Valley. And they use a lot of these simple geometric forms and very monolithic structures. And as you're going through in that VR space, they would create these chasms that you're going through, and creating these different qualities of spaces and really focusing on that experience. And if you ever get a chance, I thought it was a really great example of kind of spatial quality in the game with very simple forms. And Liebskin Holocaust Museum in Berlin, it's also very simple formally, but it's really effective use of forms to create a sense of unease and a certain experience. So these pillars are all slightly slanted, they're all quite tall and skinny, and the ground is even sloped and it's kind of wavy. So as you're walking through it, it's a bit odd and unnerving, and like you're supposed to be just experiencing that kind of, claustrophobic, sort of lopsided feeling to it all. And the whole building is just a bunch of these really impressive forms, and there's that one space where all it is just a big, kind of open chasm basically, and only one or two people are allowed in at once, with just a single slit of light in the top, and that's it. You're just experiencing that space, and you just have to have that certain impression on you of how it feels like to be in there. And then there's this other large space here, atrium space, with all these metal faces, actually, and you're walking over them and it makes this clanging sounds as you're going through that corridor. It's quite, strange and unnerving. And so a game, I thought, used a lot of these sort of unnerving, cool senses of spaces pretty well, besides some of those horror games I mentioned was Inside, which I've been playing recently. Jump to it. Oh, no.
Haven't played it yet.
Okay. I'll try not to. Where was I? 13, I think I was. Okay. Right. Thanks. 14 minutes. Have I not destroyed this game? Oh no. Oh well, I'm trying to remember what one it is, but my notes are hidden. Well, I won't look around for it to ruin it. But they did a lot of really cool. It's built in 3D, but it's a side scroller, and they really create an interesting sense of space just by playing with the foreground, the background, creating this incredible depth. And a lot of times, you're swimming through these vast areas. They'll as you pass through this doorway, the whole area kind of tilts and shifts, and you're in this massive chasm that's all slanted, and it has a very strange, eerie but expansive, impressive feeling to it all. And it's all kind of playing off some of the same ideas I was talking about with that Holocaust Museum. So just kind of fun couple of things just to throw in. Sometimes just thinking about what's the cultural context for the game you can play around with, referencing certain architecture and just considering, okay, well, what does it feel this? What were the values of that architecture? And trying to incorporate that into certain races, city, or something like that. But does anyone know which architect this is, sort of fun, which architect this is referencing? Ksenia from Mass Effect 2? No? Yeah, it's Calatrava. So he's a structural engineer and architect from Spain, and all of his forms are based off of of human body or animal bodies, and their skeletons, and have this very flowing kind of feel. Really cool architecture. And also from Mass Effect 2, Tachanka. Does anyone know which one this one's referencing? It's a bit more odd, but when I say it, they're going to be. So it's actually Frank Lloyd Wright. So Imperial Hotel, I think, is what the one we were most inspired from. I have a book that was actually talking about the architecture in Mass Effect 2, so I'm not just making that up. But yeah, so I thought that was pretty interesting, because I mean, you know, the Krogan, they're this very warlike race, and then you see this like ruined city, and it's very kind of beautiful, and you know, based off Frank Lloyd Wright. It's kind of interesting reference. And just sort of to finish off, I thought, you know, with the whole augmented reality, with Pokemon Go being so popular, and just like thinking about, you know, where is the next steps of where you can start pushing these, you know, boundaries between architecture and video games, and starting to actually, you know, integrate that gameplay with real spaces, and how do you choose, you know, these spaces within the city to create that certain feeling, or you know, creating certain gaming opportunities. I think would be pretty interesting to see where that goes. And that's it. Yeah.
That's true too. I think watching you kind of talk about this and explain it, I was thinking of that immediately, because it's cool since you're the only person and everything else are these huge, you know, creatures or whatever. But all the spaces are made for people that are your size. So it kind of gives you this idea of time and scale, because you're like, you know, who's here before, what's going on, like why are these things here. So it's just kind of on my brain. Just wanted to kind of.
You know, actually, I asked. I submitted a question one time to people in the Escapist saying, I would do the podcast, and like, what would you recommend for someone that's an architect who's interested in like spatial design and architecture? And they actually recommended Shadow of the Colossus. Like I had played it already, but yeah, I think that, you know, kind of vastness is so impressive, and when you're like riding around and just climbing up those colossi and experiencing that scale, I think is really cool too.
So Witness is a game that trains you to look at like architecture in a certain way. I'm wondering if you played it, and okay.
I haven't, no.
Maybe it's a question. Anyway, if you want to talk about that, come talk to me later. I'm just curious.
Okay. I've heard of it. I haven't played it.
I want to be in on that combo.
Yeah, after, well, we ended quite a bit early, so if people want to grab snacks and like break out into discussion groups, that would be lovely to see. And like, we can keep talking about architecture and video games. One personal example that I really like is from a local developer called MetaNet. They made a series of games, N+, and N++, and you're this, it's a 2D game, and you're like this little ninja running around these levels, and it's based on brutalist architecture. And because they're a local developer, they were inspired by the brutalist architecture at the, I believe it's the U of T campus, the big concrete turkey. And they were like, that looks like we could use that for level design. So they're very also inspired by architecture. I would definitely recommend checking that out. Any other questions? I'm here.
Yeah, I just had a question about VR, and I guess when do you see that as like an opportunity to create a kind of utopic like architects, like really you're not limited by, I guess you're still feeling like if you're a human thinking through this space, so you have to use the scale, but you're not limited by weather or like accessibility. Something like that.
Well, I've been thinking for a while about trying to do some sort of installation, you know, in a real space, like in a park somewhere or whatever, and then just thinking about, okay, how are you approaching that, and then how is that going to be interactive with other people, and how can you create that experience of actually sitting there playing the game, the actual space itself, as well as like the game itself. So yeah, like I think augmented reality is a great opportunity for that, and you know, it doesn't even have to be augmented reality. It could just be these kind of game stations in a certain space, or you know, lots of opportunities I think for creating like a cool playing experience for sure. Yes.
One last. Do you have an example of like a favorite space, real world ending? And I'm putting you on the spot here.
There was actually this one that always hangs in my mind. It was like a real world space, and I was trying to find images of it, and I couldn't even find pictures from when we were in Spain. Actually, went to this architectural expo, and I was kind of underwhelmed by it in general. But there was this one cool building that it was like a big cave, basically, when you went inside. And then they had all of these projections on the walls everywhere, and they had like these movies playing. And you could basically just like sit in different spots and you lean on these different columns. They're all chamfered in different ways, and it was really flexible. Everyone was just kind of, laying wherever they wanted to. And it had this really cool quality, and everything was projected on these different, forms. And I thought that was like really, really cool. I was really inspired by that. Other than a video game, that's really hard. I don't know. I'd have to think about that one, I guess.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, when you were playing a video game, you kind of have permission to interact with the architecture in a lot of ways in real life, whether it's to try to find a way to climb on top of it, or try to find a way to sneak through a vent, for example. How does, I imagine when people design architecture for video games, it's going to make that obvious when you can do that, or when you can't do that. Like, is this door just another random rectangle, or is this actually a door I can interact with?
Yeah.
Yet most doors I see on rebuilds in real life, I'm probably not supposed to interact with.
Yeah.
So how does that tension make video game versus real life architecture design different? I guess.
Well, I was kind of thinking about that because, in real life, you're not really allowed to go climbing up a wall or whatever. Like, actually, look at, speaking of leaf skin, the crystal, the wrong crystal. I actually think it's a pretty interesting space, and a lot of architects hate that building with fiery passion. But I actually think it's interesting, and they try to push for this kind of experiential, cool form. But then, as a result of just kind of practicality, they have to put all these barriers all over the place because they can't allow kids to run up these angled walls and stuff, right? And it's funny, they actually have to stop people from doing what they would just naturally want to do, right? And you see like a little cubby, or you see a sloped wall, you want to lean on it, you want to run up it. And I think that's, it's kind of frustrating sometimes, with kind of real world things that sometimes you don't get to do that as much as you want to. And, I think with games, just thinking about like, how do you kind of create this space that can be used in a different way and people can play in a different way? Just having a bay window that's projected out can suddenly create a seating space, in a real building. And started thinking like, when you're creating a game, okay, well, how do I, use these little opportunities? Like, does it have to be just a big space with a door in the middle, or can I start playing with people wanting to run up that wall and things like that? And I think also like things like Assassin's Creed, where you can run through these real world buildings. I think that's pretty interesting. Is like, when do you get to run up, Pantheon? Like, never, right? So like, I think it's pretty cool to think like, okay, experiencing these awesome buildings in a game, like you suddenly get to see them in a totally different way. I think that's pretty cool to try to take advantage of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, I have a friend who's also architecture, and like he used to generally likes to climb things. So we were at this public library. So it's gonna be somewhere to the raw, but there's always in the building where like it gets structural, so it's easier to climb than raw. But also like so it's
Yeah.
and so they got kicked out right away.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like he has like a GoPro and he goes around climbing roofs, like architecture, right?
Yeah.
So it's roofs, or even like there's this giant, like one of those arched, like bridges, right? Like it's super easy to climb because it's a curve, right? Where you like jump over the curve, so you just climb that up. It's easy as that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this fun thing. It's great in architecture. Like one of the things that teaches in school is like make sure you design for the people. Like it's not just a cool, beautiful building. Like it should be also human-centered design. But then,
Yeah. Well, that's why I think that space that we go into in Ryerson is so cool. That like mountain that you get to like sit on, and the whole building is just a bunch of these flexible seating areas, and you're allowed to kind of go everywhere. I think that's a pretty cool example.
That's the Ryerson Student Learning Center. That just it's a pretty new building, isn't
Yeah.
it? But the different levels of the building are based on different aspects of nature. Like they've got the beach. I think the sun is at the top. They have a forest canopy. So we've done a couple of events in the launch zone, and it's this sort of very open space with like big glass windows, and so you can like see easily that something is happening in that space. But they have this giant blue foam mountain in one corner that you can take off your shoes and climb around on. And so when we do presentations, we would set up all these chairs in front of the screen and be like, all right, everyone, take a seat. We're going to start the presentation. And everyone would sit on the blue mountain, and there would be nowhere near the speaker. So I'm like, that was one aspect maybe we could have thought more of, like, you know, where would the people be in, where would the people want to sit, and where would the speaker be? We're like at odds with each other. So the speaker's at the bottom, like yelling up at people, but I think it encouraged people to talk more because they were looking down on the speaker, and like it made them less vulnerable.
There's actually a cool building in Yellowknife from like rock everywhere in Yellowknife. There's this giant rock that was on the site, and usually everyone just blasted away. But they kept it, and they were building a school there, and that became the amphitheater seating area. It was this massive rock, so everyone just could sit on it how they wanted, and they kind of integrated the stair into it, so that when they had these little kind of performances and stuff, people would like do it there. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah.
We had Matt, and then
There's also a question over here.
okay, cool. So if you want to speak loudly so everyone can hear, if you even want to come up and grab the mic, that would be awesome.
Sure.
Matt here is Matt here made a game called Lovers in the Danger of Space Time. That is excellent.
Do you have any like pet peeves in game architecture design that you see that drive you crazy?
That was what the slide of the map was about. Because that was the thing that made me initially think I could maybe work in game design, was when I was playing Metroid Prime, and I was running through this map I could not understand. I was just like, who the hell designed this level? This is ridiculous. Or this entire map. And it was basically, they kind of seemed like they were designing levels or areas individually and just connecting them with little corridors, right? And then not thinking about it as a whole. So that was, I think, my biggest pet peeve. And it was just really like, okay, they need somebody to figure this out. Maybe I could like work in this or something. But yeah, I think, for me, because my sense of navigation is not that great, so when a game doesn't do enough to help you understand that really bothers me. And I think some people are better at it, so they don't get frustrated. But when you're running through a game, you have no idea where you are. Like, I find that pretty annoying, and just kind of thinking about, well, how do these spaces relate to each other, and like, how do I make someone understand that, and give these little hints or have some kind of logical progression. Like, I think for me that's like a pretty important thing. Yeah.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah.
Who was the...
Oh yeah.
So I see a lot of, I recently went on a trip and got to see a lot of architectural differences between like antiquity and newer creations. And it's something that often happens is that I see an architect trying to reach for kind of a special place that defies the laws of physics. Sometimes you see a piece like the vertical gardens like in Milan that just you wonder yourself, the vertical forest that you wonder yourself, how does this even happen? Right? You kind of break that space between what's physically expected of a building and what the architect produces with the mastery of forces and mechanics that they apply. In video games, the role is often inverted.
Yeah.
You have the freedom to create abstract constructions, but it seems like the game designer has an obligation to respect the assumed implied laws of physics.
Yeah.
Compare something like the it's called the OCAD building, which just you look at it and you try to work out what's technology is setting up. So the architecture you would see, for example, in Fez, where the artist has to go an extra mile to kind of explain how the whole thing is set up.
Yeah.
The building in with audience in order to make it a smash. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is where is that sweet spot between like a magical, no physics allowed section and kind of respecting what we come to expect in like our physically based reality and the constraints that fit that kind of the structural forces applied to building. And game design, how far can we push that? And we know many good examples that have gone beyond and things like that.
Well, actually, like in that VR game, Land's End, I thought that was kind of interesting because you just kind of floated from one area to another. You know, you're just looking and then you went there. So I thought it was kind of interesting because all they were really focused on was that experience, and they didn't really pay attention to how physically are you walking there, moving there. So like obviously it looked like a real world setting, but there was kind of this, I don't know, other kind of surreal aspect to it. So I think that was an interesting example where it kind of blended the two together, and it was very focused on just creating these experiences for you and, you know, shaping that landscape, and not so concerned about, you know, how are you going to jump or something like that. It was just like you just flowed there and you just you basically fly across an area and that'd be that. But yeah, I think it obviously depends on the game, and the gameplay aspect is such a huge, you know, part, and how you feel moving the character, that, you know, that takes a huge priority in video games. So yeah, like for me, I think that often it can be pushed a lot more, and I think it's funny because architects always want to do something more interesting and, you know, not so constrained, but then game designers feel like maybe they have to constrain themselves a bit more to make it more realistic. And yeah, depending on, I guess on what you're going for, but I think people should be encouraged to push it a bit more. You know, what do you start stepping back and focus on? Okay, what is it that I want the player to feel, and what do I need to provide for them gameplay wise, and how do I start considering like these flexible options for them to play, as well as just, you know, what kind of a space do I want to create, or what kind of an experience do I want to create, and then maybe look at that design from that perspective, you know, as well as sort of the practicalities of, you know, how are they going to move around or get to the door or something like that. Might be an interesting way of maybe trying to pull away a bit from some of those constraints, at least not be so bogged down by them initially. Okay. That's it. Thank you. Just to wrap things up really quickly, if you're not familiar with Hand-Eye Society and want to learn more, we have a bunch of handy postcards up where the snacks are, and that's also where the cash box is if you want to make a little donation. And you can find us online. We got Twitter, we got Facebook, and we have handeyesociety.com. You can find out more about that. Thank you all very much for coming. You are dismissed.